Oh, greetings. Happy day. You can have some people waiting. Uh, do I have good audio? I got to check the audio. I have no idea what's causing it, and I can never get a response out of YouTube for anything. Of course, that's like typical. Twitter responds, and you can almost get a human without too much trouble. Forget Facebook. Forget Facebook. All right, we have audio. Yippee. This is rather lengthy. This is and it's thick language. It's a legal review, um, but a lot of it's footnotes and citations. So I don't know how much of a read this is going to be. I've only skimmed it so far, but this is what's happening. I've covered the medical aspects pretty thoroughly, and have some more material tonight if anybody's interested. Let's look at what we're facing. Basically, the consensus in the scientific community is that we're legit. There's a biological basis for same-sex attraction and gender variance, and that's the way it is. And there's nothing pathological about it. There is nothing abnormal about it. Some people are unable to cope and must get their genitals modified to match their gender, or they are unable to live comfortably in their bodies. This is just medical fact. Transgender people only represent, transsexual people who can't live with the genitals they're born with are probably less than a fifth of all the people that identify as transgender. And, I want to avoid terms like true, authentic. No, it's a spectrum. Yeah, my stuff makes sperm, but that's where it stops. My biological gender is female. We cool. And the medical community agrees with me. This is where it's at. It's not a mental illness to be same-sex attracted or gender variant. Bottom line, fuck off with that shit. So here we have a UC Irvine law review. Being transgender in the era of Trump. Compassion should pick up where science leaves off. And this is an issue on religious freedom. It's by Robin Fretwell Wilson. Doesn't say anything about this person, what they are. Well, there's a star there. Oh, okay. It's Roger and Stephanie Jocelyn, professor of law and director of the Family Law. That's who this guy is. Being transgender in the era of Trump. Compassion should pick up where science leaves off. Its introduction, legal status in flux, increasing visibility, Mayer and McHugh's controversy-provoking paper, the limits of science, brain anatomy, hormones, concern for public health should be paramount, and conclusion. We might skip to the conclusion pretty quickly. We never know. Let's see if anybody said anything. Nope, nobody said nothing. Feel free to call on any of those three lines. The Gmail, it works for Hangouts. In a divisive time, few issues are more polarizing than how Americans treat transgender individuals. This small sliver of Americans, 0.6% of all adults, or 1.4 million people, and this is an approximation that came from the Williams Institute 2016 study, which is a part of the law college at UCLA. And here they define transgender. Throughout this article, transgender or trans is used as an umbrella term to refer to individuals whose gender identity is different from their sex at birth. This umbrella definition is not meant to detract from the importance of the wide range of gender identities. Because preferred terminology can vary from person to person, transgender is used for simplicity's sake. Outdated terms such as transsexual are used when used in the specific scientific studies being cited. Okay, many states, okay, this has prompted polar responses from legislators and policymakers. Many states have protected trans individuals from discrimination in housing, hiring, and public accommodations. That would be California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, Utah, Vermont, Washington, and Wisconsin, as well as the District of Columbia. Other states, however, have passed or are considering legislation that regulates access by trans individuals. Some of them are dying in committee, getting killed by the speakers or the governors because they don't want the economic whipping that North Carolina took for Hate Bill 2. Some states, as legislation concerning trans individuals continues to take form, an increasingly fractured public discourse has arisen. We'll touch on that too. Public support for trans people has left with increased public awareness of discrimination. Advocates have also got a public face on the struggles that transgender persons face. Oh boy. Well, these guys are in Los Angeles, so they're saying, think Caitlyn Jenner and Laverne Cox, and I say, come on, that's just a couple of Hollywood attention whores. And one of them's like a conservatard, and they're both like overprivileged. At least Laverne earned her way there. But they don't. That's bullshit. That's no. I don't want to disparage either one of them, but they're not typical of transgender people and the struggles that they face. Neither one. Again, Laverne is a little more typical, coming from where she comes from and what she went through and did to get where she is. But no, you want to look at people, look at who should we say first? Jennifer Boylan, college professor and writer. Lynn Conway, your communications devices wouldn't work without her BSLI patents. But as far as like typical struggles facing transgender people, I'd say look to the local organizers. And there's basically two types. Commonly, there's some folks that are coming out, the veterans. They're all over the country. You know, and they're all leading in terms of education and fighting, or fighting for or against legislation. And then there's people like myself who just like come up out of the city and adapted to, here we are. And under the Obama administration, it just became obvious that, to me, it became obvious that I was being stupid and that it was safe to come out and that I could be myself in public safely, and I can. I'm very grateful to be in Tucson doing it because I have the energy to do this kind of shit. I get nothing but you know, I got nothing but like really good. I'm just another person in town as far as anybody's concerned when I'm out and about. Um, the only place I get any shit is from trolls. I can't complain. I just won't complain. I give thanks every time I see some bullshit happen to somebody somewhere. Um, Recently, the larger debate over the status of and protections for trans individuals become inflamed by a searing dispute over a single question: whether being trans has any biological or genetic basis, or is rather a pathogenic meme. A review article published by a pair of professors associated with Johns Hopkins University drew forceful criticism from the scientific community and advocates. In a 143-page paper, replete with 373 footnotes, Dr. Paul McHugh, the University Distinguished Service Professor of Psychiatry and Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Hopkins, and a rabidly transphobic Catholic extremist and dominionist, and Dr. Lawrence Mayer, a statistician, I think, is also Catholic and definitely like a rabid transphobic Arizona scholar in residence at Hopkins at that time, urged that almost nothing is well understood when we seek biological explanations for what causes some individuals to state that their gender does not match their biological sex. The findings that do exist often have sample selection problems, and they lack longitudinal perspective and explanatory power. Yet, despite the scientific uncertainty, drastic interventions are prescribed and delivered to patients identifying or identified as transgender. There is a lack of reliable studies on the long-term effects of these interventions. We strongly urge caution in this regard. While caution is part of the protocols, the standards of care that are recommended by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, and WHO, you know, caution's part of the game. And there's only the satisfaction rates for hormone therapy and surgeries are in the high 90s. And most of the dissatisfaction is a result of like social issues. Most of the detransitioning is due to outside pressures. It's not because they decided they aren't trans anymore, because by the time they get to that, they come to some agreement with either like their parents or therapists or something like that, where they're persistent in their insistence that they are of the opposite gender of their sex. By the time it gets around to actual medical transition, there has been plenty of care exercise. You know, they bitch about the gatekeeping, but you know, they have a really good track record so far. And clinical studies, even though the sampling is a little flawed, and it's going to be, how many of us are there? We're scattered all over the place. They're getting this data from everywhere, and there's not much of it. But it's showing that when the kids transition young in a supportive environment, they thrive. They're testing out, you know, all the really bad behavioral health issues go right away. You know, I haven't had any kind of outburst since I started taking hormones. None. And I was on hair trigger. I mean, I still am on a short trigger, but I got it under control now because I got the right chemistry in. Moving right along. Mayer and McHugh's paper has been used by legislators and others to discredit the needs and experiences of transgender individuals. In the words of Representative Louis Gohmert, another rabid transphobic religious fanatic, it is time to stop the nonsense. The blowback has reverberated within Hopkins and beyond. Hopkins staff, students, and alumni called on Hopkins to publicly and specifically disavow Mayer and McHugh's statements and publications on LGBT individuals, and to clearly state that the pair's rhetoric is a personal opinion and not the official position. In fact, contrary to the official position and all of the best evidence of Hopkins institutions. The Human Rights Campaign, arguably the most influential gay rights organization in the nation, reacted swiftly. It demanded that Hopkins correct the record, clarifying that McHugh and Mayer's opinions do not represent Hopkins and its healthcare services provided reflect the scientific consensus on LGBTQ health and well-being. Hopkins declined to do so. The disagreement about biological explanations for being transgender misses the most critical point. Trans persons experience enormous psychological distress across their lives. By one estimate, as many as 4 in 10 trans individuals attempt suicide. Beyond suicide risk, trans individuals often struggle with depression and anxiety at rates that far surpass the rates of those for the general population. For children raised in unwelcoming households, this psychological distress is amplified and can be crushing. I'm surprised they don't go into the rage, because that is an issue for many of us. It's an element you'll see in various documentaries about the children, the one growing up transgender, or living a transgender childhood, I think it's called, about Josie Romero and her family. I think that she just horrible temper tantrums that stop as soon as they let her be herself. And it's common in the kids. This article argues that an appropriate response to the difficulties facing trans persons should not become mired down in a scientific debate about causation. Woo! Oh, that's one of those, yeah. Because that's what's driving the monoliths mad. That's what Lisette is always like, and God, and this was what Carol Brochin, when she led to walk out, it was like, look, our kids' sexuality, the validity of our children's sexuality and gender or identity is not up for debate. It's discriminating against their own children. And the other day, Debbie Jackson said, look, if you've never talked to a trans kid, don't talk about them. Because you don't know what you're talking about. You have no idea. It's all conjecture. Whether, and this is also the same thing, it's like, whether it's biological, cultural, doesn't really matter. It's really both. Because it varies from culture to culture. But the biological potential is there for somebody to build a transgender identity on. Whether the experience of being transgender stems from a genetic or biological basis, or more explainable as a result of one's environment, the classic nature versus nurture debate, matters little to the very real public health crisis facing this community. Compassion should guide the discussion. It really is, and it should not fall on the transgender person to educate people about what it is to be transgender. That's something that is readily available out there for you to learn on your own and not be stressing trans folks out asking stupid questions. I mean, basically, most of us really don't want to have to be like concerning ourselves with our transness. This is me. You know, before you know, a lot of people who know me for a long time, when I came out, it was like they understood me better. And several had said, you know, I never really thought of you as a man or a woman. You were always Tommy, which is what I am, because I, you know, I refused to be masculine and I wasn't allowed to be feminine. So I ended up real gender neutral. I'm good. I'm okay. People like me. People like my art. You know, yeah, some people hate me, but more people like me than hate me, so I'm good. I could use a lover and I could use a lawyer and better cash flow. Otherwise, I'm good. I'm good. Um, more hugs. But you know, I just don't know enough people well enough to get good hugs. At least not ones that are here in town a lot. Where were we? Part 1 gives a brief description of seesawing protections for trans persons in federal law with the change of administrations. This is important because this has had a big influence in the visibility. It also describes stark differences between the states where lawmakers take very different stances on the need for non-discrimination protections. Arizona is not good, and we have like Governor Ducey, who just doesn't think that it's important enough to put sexual orientation and gender identity into the anti-discrimination law. This oscillating treatment underlines the T has become a ground zero in the culture war over LGBT rights, with the I sitting invisibly off to the side, stirring up our own shit. And then there are those of us who are transgender and intersex. And then, you know, we're the ones that are saying, well, hey, look, it's like individuals. We're all individuals. You cannot label everybody male or female. It just doesn't work. It never did. And it's there in the history books if you read it properly. And that's just the way it is. And there, you know, excuse me, but there is absolutely no rational reason to discriminate against a person who is like trans feminine or trans masculine. There's just no good reason. Nobody's ever been able to give me one. And truth be told, the stigmatization of effeminate men and masculine women is mostly a result of people's own insecurities projecting their denial on others, their own self-loathing about their own sexuality, their own gender orientation, their own sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay, elsewhere, compassion should guide the discussion. Elsewhere, I make an affirmative case for non-discrimination protections encompassing the full LGBT community. This article stakes out a more modest claim that the scientific debate is a distraction from a real and present public health crisis affecting trans members of our community. And that's true. That, you know, here we are struggling to come together as a community to find the resources that we need to live our lives comfortably and productively, safely. We have families, we have neighbors, we have friends, we have employers, we have landlords, we have all sorts of people in our lives. We're just people. And there's no good reason to be making our lives any more difficult than they already are. Excuse me. Part 2 reviews incident study showing how quickly the trans population seems to have ballooned, and links to those findings to how researchers ask demographic questions and define key terms. Part 3 reviews claims made by Mayer and McHugh in the New Atlantis paper, as well as claims made by others in reliance on that piece. This part traces the controversy not to Mayer and McHugh's observations about the limits of our existing knowledge, something every study author acknowledges, as does HRC. Instead, Part 3 examines broader statements used as capstones to specific critiques that have inflamed the debate. Part 4 briefly sketches the nascent science about cross-gender identification, noting its limits. Part 5 then documents the depression and emotional struggles borne by the community that all too often end in suicide. This part argues that this profile represents a classic public health crisis, which can and should be addressed whatever the underlying basis for identifying with a gender different from one's sex at birth. The clinical studies are showing that the public health crisis is due to institutionalized discrimination against transgender people, starting in the home with their parents. And that's being addressed on a lot of levels. Hello? Hello? Goodbye. That's being addressed. You know, there's PFLAG, there's HRC, you know, the Parents of Transgender Children group at Facebook has thousands of families in it. There's something like 100 families with gender variant kids in Saga in southern Arizona. We're a community. We're working with the school boards and the school people. We're working, the El Rio Community Health Center has a fabulous transgender health program, pediatric and adult. We're part of reality, and there should be accommodation for us that isn't really even special accommodation. It's just recognizing us as an authentic, natural-born minority that has some special needs that we should not be denied. It's a big deal. Otherwise, we're just seeking equal treatment under the law. But, some people need to get their bodies modified, and that's just the way it works. There's less and less. I need to hose this place down again. Swirling around this discussion is a new political dynamic. Legal protection secured by transgender people that are being reevaluated in the era of President Trump. And this is since 1969. There's a number of things. And particularly under the Obama administration, a lot of changes. The two most important rulings were the Coy-Mathis ruling in 2013 that enabled a transgender kindergartner to use the girls' room in Colorado. And that really turned all the Christian guns on us. Boy, that's what did it. And when they lost Obergefell versus Hodges versus Obergefell, or Obergefell versus Hodges, the same-sex ruling, all the guns from Alliance Defending Freedom and Family Research Council and that whole crowd turned on transgender. We became the focus. They thought we would be the most vulnerable, easiest to pick off, and as it turns out, we started the fight in the first place. we've been right on the front of it all along. We won numbers of significant rulings over the years. Carolyn Cossey fought for her right to get married as a woman. There's just been all kinds of stuff. I forget. I'm not right up with it, so I can talk off the cuff about too much of them. At the federal level, the tangible gains realized by the trans community under the Obama administration are being recalibrated in real time. Yeah, and Bryn Tannehill called it. So far, it's not quite as bad as she thought, but it's getting there. It's getting there. We really need to defeat. If they have a second term, we're in big trouble. President Trump's tweet announcing that transgender persons may no longer serve in the military is proving but one instance of this phenomenon. So this is a little dated already, because like I don't think it's going to cover the ROGD, the Littman paper, which I think came out in 2018. It's not, they're not going to deal with that, and that raised even bigger stink and caused even more crap with the people waving it around in legislatures as solid science. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions issued a memorandum on October 4th, 2017, reversing the interpretation by former Attorney General Eric Holder that Title VII protects individuals from discrimination on the basis of gender identity. And I think Title VII is referring to the Civil Rights Act. So there's Title IX in the Education Act that is relevant to all this, and Title VII in the Civil Rights Act. Former Obama administration general counsel to the U.S. Equal Opportunity Commissions, David Lopez, described the change as a brazen flip-flop. While it remains to be seen how far the Trump administration will go on uprooting Obama-era protections, President Trump has named polarizing figures on civil rights issues to key positions tasked with enforcing non-discrimination protections. Oh God, he's got a televangelist in the White House now. And Tony Perkins, I think, is on that morality committee. Many now fear that access to gender reassignment services under the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, ACA, will be in the crosshairs next. In this seesawing of rights, gain is followed by loss, not a game of pong. States are more mixed in the legal protections they give to trans persons. Roughly 2/5 of the states protect trans individuals against discrimination in housing, hiring, and public accommodations, with the number of states varying by precisely what the law covers: housing and hiring only, or housing, hiring, and public accommodations. 3 states have barred municipalities from enacting ordinances to protect LGBT persons from discrimination, laws that are presently being challenged. Additionally, 1 state, Mississippi, purported to protect the sincerely held religious beliefs or moral convictions that male or female refer to an individual's immutable biological sex as objectively determined by anatomy and genetics at birth. For lack of standing, Mississippi's law survived constitutional challenges. The law's establishment of religion, because it privileged certain religious beliefs over others, and that the law violated equal protection because it provided different protections to different religious beliefs. Because no Mississippi law presently protects LGBT persons from discrimination in any realm, including in government employment, Mississippi's purported protections for those sincerely held religious beliefs are more illusory than real. North Carolina's controversial legislation, now largely repealed, also barred localities from protecting LGBT persons, but went a step further, focusing on the use of public bathrooms and other spaces. It barred localities and businesses from making accommodations for trans individuals in the use of facilities, requiring trans persons to use bathrooms matching their sex at birth, a decision which has implications for their safety. It also is like every police chief in the country is kind of like shook their head and rolled their eyes at that one. It's like, how the fuck do you expect us to enforce it? You know, the Texas police chiefs all got up in front of their legislature and said, look, you're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist with a law that can't be enforced. That stance precipitated a public outcry and numerous boycotts, causing significant economic harm to the state. By one estimate, if the legislation had not been repealed, the laws would have equaled $3.76 billion, which is why the bathroom bills don't make it out of committee very much. In February 2017, North Carolina repealed the portion of the law pertaining to restrooms and other facilities that are privately owned. Despite the fallout from North Carolina's law, other states introduced their own bathroom of one's birth laws in 2017. None have been enacted because none of them wanted the whipping that North Carolina got. Litigation over transgender rights has followed a similar path. In 2015, the Department of Justice filed a statement of interest in the Virginia case brought by the ACLU on behalf of a student born female but now identifies as a male. That's Gavin Grimm. The statement of interest argued that the position taken by the Office of Civil Rights was the appropriate interpretation of requirements under Title IX. That's the Education Act. The federal law banning discrimination on the basis of sex in education. And what it comes down to, well, let's wait. I'll wait for that. This is like where it's at with the law and transgender people. Specifically, OCR contended that the term sex, as it is used in Title IX, is broad and encompasses gender identity, including transgender status. This is where it's at in both Title IX and Title VII from the Civil Rights Act, is that the language says sex. It does not say gender identity or sexual orientation. And that's what needs to be in there, because all of, not all, but certainly a lot of what we have today rests on the interpretation of judges, lower court judges, who determined that discrimination against a person because of gender identity or because of sexual orientation is a form of sexual discrimination. This is what's being, the Supreme Court pretty much been avoiding this for a lot of years. They refused to hear the Gavin Grimm case, but now they got 3 cases in front of them, all of them brought by the Alliance Defending Freedom, dealing with gender identity. I think there's a sexual orientation case in there too, and they have us on pins and needles until June. No telling which way they're going to go. I mean, there is a mountain of precedent in our favor because there have been so many of these rulings. It's like, well, yeah, that's a form of sex discrimination. And now it just needs to, this is what the Equality Act is seeking to put into the law. It's just to amend the existing law with those terms. That's all it's really the Equality Act's about. And they're fighting it tooth and nail. Initially, the federal district court dismissed the claim, concluding that OCR's interpretation was not a plausible reading of Title IX and conflicted with earlier Department of Education regulations permitting schools to segregate based on sex. The court found that sex includes biological sex. The ACLU appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. In a 2-to-1 decision, Fourth Court ruled in favor of the ACLU. Majority concluded that the trial judge should have deferred to the Department of Education's 2015 interpretation of the 1972 statute, and the trial judge employed the wrong standard for determining whether to issue a preliminary injunction. A petition for rehearing en banc was denied. The school district appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which granted review. What case is that? Oh, yeah, that's the Gavin Grimm case. While a case was pending in the U.S. Supreme Court, the Trump administration rescinded the Obama-era guidance on Title IX's application to gender identity. The Supreme Court vacated and remanded to the Fourth Circuit, which vacated the preliminary injunction in April of 2017. Fourth Circuit scheduled oral argument in September of 2017 to determine the merits of the claim in the absence of the Department of Education's now rescinded guidance. Of the 3 judges on the original 2-to-1 Fourth Circuit panel, 1 has retired. Gavin Grimm has since graduated from high school. The Fourth Circuit panel remanded to the district court to determine whether this case has become moot, canceling oral argument. The ACLU argued that Gavin Grimm may return to school as an alumnus, making the case not moot. Whatever the outcome of Gavin Grimm's case, clearly uncertainty clouds the prospects for trans individuals under the law. Adding to this instability is a public discourse that treats trans persons as a phenomenon that emerged from nowhere, as the next section shows, and has been focused on the wrong question, a point made in sections 3 and 4. We didn't emerge from nowhere. We've always been here. You know, I had transgender neighbors when I was a kid. My father used to like to take his out-of-town pal cruising Broadway to it's not COPD, trust me. I need more water. I've had awful allergies all my life. All my nose, throat, always stuffed up and scratchy. Always have been. It doesn't help that I smoke, but I've always had this. Oh, I'm getting acupuncture on Wednesday. So, the increasing visibility of the trans community has contributed to both greater awareness and charges. I probably should see if anybody said anything before I get rolling off. Hi, Ed and Nam. Oh, thanks. Thanks. It's my Bubba cup. It's like a half a gallon, and I fill it 3-4 times a day. Oh, hi, Donald. Happy day. Thanks for coming. And it's usually got water. If it doesn't have water, I put my smoothies in it. Okay, back to the article. This is interesting stuff, and it's important to know. You know, if you're transgender or an ally, we're facing some really powerful opposition that's real well funded, and what that equates to is votes. And we cannot afford to be losing any kind of like referendum that is either going to offer us protective law or any referendum that's trying to discriminate against us. We can't afford to lose those, and we don't have the same kind of money to turn out the votes that the opposition has. So, the increasing visibility of the trans community has contributed to both greater awareness and charges that being trans amounts to a mere fad. In 2016, Andrew Flores and colleagues at the Williams Institute reported that 0.6% of US adults identify as transgender, equating to 1.4 million Americans. If there's that many adults, there's probably 3 times as many kids right now. Boy, the parents are just coming out of the woodwork. Every week I see more and more of them showing up. My kid just came out to me. What do I do? Oh, here we go. Here's where you go. The incidence of self-reported transgender adults doubled in the space of 5 years. Outside the United States, the reported number of trans persons are on the rise too. Consider patients at a Melbourne Children's Hospital. In 2003, only 1 child identified as transgender every 2 years. And by 2014, 104 children identified as trans that year alone. Reported incidents vary significantly by country. The wild swings in incidents across the years and between studies has fed into charges that it's simply trendy to say one is transgender. What should one make of this variability and clear uptick? Importantly, incident studies rely on self-reports. Florey's study is a good example. It utilized the behavioral risk factor surveillance system to collect self-reported data through telephone interviews. The interviews asked responders, do you consider yourself to be transgender? If the respondent asked the interviewer what transgender means, the interviewer said, some people describe themselves as transgender when they experience a different gender identity from their sex at birth. For example, a person born into a male body but who feels female or lives as a woman would be transgender. Some people change their physical appearance so that it matches their internal gender identity. Some transgender people take hormones and some have surgery. A transgender person may be of any sexual orientation, straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or asexual. They don't like being erased either. You know, some people just don't want anything to do with sex. They are not turned on by it. They are just often in a different world than a sexual one. Note that one could answer in the affirmative without having taken hormones or other steps to change one's outward appearance. So we're under no obligation to perform up to anybody's standards. So there's only one thing that's important to a person who's gender variant. It's like, am I comfortable with the way I'm dressing myself, with the way that I'm grooming myself, with the way I'm behaving? You know, does this feel good to me? It does not feel good to, I mean, you'll hear, clothing and hairstyles and all this other happy shit. It's only part of it. But what it all comes down to is contentment. You know, am I happy with myself? Is this what I want to be doing with my life? Is this how I want to present myself to the world? And for the overwhelming majority of us, when we do it in a supportive environment, we benefit. Our families benefit, our communities benefit, and we live nice lives. What the fuck is your problem? Why do you need to make things difficult for us? Indeed, the term transgender is an umbrella term encompassing individuals who identify with a gender that is different from their sex at birth. That difference may occur in connection with a person being born with a disorder of sex development, sometimes called intersex. See, this is all way behind the time. Disorder of sex development, or DSD, was pretty much changed to difference to try and depathologize it. And now the intersex activists are saying, hey, look, these are just natural body variations. Back off with all this other, other stuff. It's just like turning it into some kind of disorder, and it's not. It's just, and nobody's hands are all the same. People's faces are not all the same. There's too much variation. And you don't call any of that any abnormalities. And intersex people are tired of being seen as being abnormal. Transgender people are not abnormal. We're atypical. Cisgender and heterosexual are the most typical sex and gender combinations, but there are others, and that's just the way it is. Okay? Just let it be. Don't like it? Don't look. Okay, and it may have resulted in surgical correction, and they have that in air quotes for that, at birth. A condition that affects 1 in 2,000 children born today. These children may present with ambiguous genitalia or primary sex characteristics of both sex. When a child is born with one of these conditions, healthcare providers often take steps to normalize the child's genitalia. That is, they do surgery on the child and make the child's genitalia present as male or female, and have really fucked a lot of lives up doing it. This is right up there with conversion therapy, and we call it IGM. I think the doctors want to call it intersex genital modification, and the activists want to call it infant genital mutilation. Whether born intersex or not, a person may simply identify with a gender different from the body sex characteristics. Not all intersex people are transgender. So if their stuff is mainly female, well, not all intersex people are transgender. As part 4 briefly explains, in fetal development, sex characteristics develop at a different time than the fetal brain, resulting in mixed signals, although little is known definitively about why some persons identify with another gender. They're getting there. They found some structures in the brain that are associated with gendered behavior. And they've also found that the brains of transgender people more closely resemble the brains of their cisgender counterparts than cisgender people of their same sex. Socially, the term transgender is used to describe a wide range of gender identities. Socially, the term transgender is getting kind of like downplayed in the, it's like, okay, as well, this is transgender, but then we don't want to erase any of the asexual, bigender, or agender, or any of these other people. So that's where, because the alphabet soup gets real weird. And then the other side's calling them the alphabet people. And it always happens that the people that are the most vocal or the most visible are the most weird. And the worst advocates, like me, for instance. But Reddit, for instance, I was like over it with the Kiwis for the last few days. What a crowd. And they they have these people, and it's not just the Kiwis. I see it on like at American Thinker, on the conservative rags when I'm reading the comments. These people only notice, and it's always been a visibility has always been a problem. In the old days, I've been watching the personals for a long time, and in the old days, somebody transitioned and disappeared. So it's nobody. There are no post-ops visible. They just disappeared. And most everybody else was closeted, other than the sex workers and drag queens. And there was, a certain amount of, there's a lot of heterosexual trans people who Mattachine Society, I think, was started by some of them. There's a lot of old cross-dressing like gatherings that were put on by heterosexual trans folk, cross-dressers, transvestites, and they called them at that time. But it's a spectrum. A lot of transsexuals start out doing drag. Some go back to it. Seen Laverne Cox, the Emily Fishbane. She's doing big time drag. Then they love it. It's just okay. That's them. And that's the celebrate diversity crowd. And that's where compassion comes in. It's like, look, everybody is like individuals, and the more individual someone is, the more difficult it seems to be for them to gain any acceptance in the herd. So we have to make our own herd. But then we get all kinds of like stereotypical norms that and rules and stuff that all the narcissists want to lay out, and thought police and shit. So we end up isolated. Authoritative medical bodies have developed specific inclusion criteria for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, a diagnosis on which healthcare coverage may depend. And I've talked about this because that's where the flashpoint is between the people who really need to get it and the people who just want it because they want it. And then they're all bitching about gatekeeping, but we need it to a certain extent to keep people from doing it like frivolously, and getting it covered for their insurance while screwing up the insurance for people that need it. Is really what what we need the gatekeeping for. It's like, hey, you want to go get it, but pay for it. Don't be trying to like fake any like medical need for it if you just like want to have tits and keep your dick kind of shit. The 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, published by the American Psychological Association, very precisely defines gender dysphoria to require at least 2 of the following symptoms for at least 6 months in adolescents and adults. A marked incongruence between one's experienced expressed gender and primary and/or secondary characteristics. A strong desire to be rid of one's primary and/or secondary sex characteristics. A strong desire for the primary and/or secondary sex characteristic of the other gender. A strong desire to be the other gender. A strong desire to be treated as the other gender, and a strong conviction that one has the typical feelings and reactions of the other gender. In children, for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, the DSM-5 requires that the child display at least 6 of the following for at least 6 months. A strong desire to be, okay, this is a little bit different. A strong desire to be of the other gender, or an insistence that one is of the other gender. There's a little bit of a difference there. And I think that plays out over time. Now, I don't want to be the other gender. I want to be rid of like the wrong shit for the gender that I've always felt that I am. A strong preference for wearing clothes typical of the opposite gender. A strong preference for cross-gender roles in make-believe play or fantasy play. A strong preference for the toys, games, or activities stereotypically used or engaged by the other gender. A strong preference for playmates of the other gender. A strong rejection of toys, games, and activities typical of one's assigned gender. Strong dislike. Oh, so dusty in this town. A strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy. A strong desire for the physical sex characteristics that match one's experienced gender. Notably, the diagnosis in adolescents and adults requires significant distress or problems functioning. In children, it requires significant distress or impairment in function. Patently, not all trans individuals report distress. And that's where the conflict in the community arises. There's nothing wrong with expressing as the other gender if the gender that matches your gonads doesn't like bother you that much. You just prefer to express it. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make them any less transgender. It just makes them where they don't have a medical necessity for any of the gender affirmation procedures. It's the only thing there. Additionally, not all trans individuals will pursue the full gamut of possible steps to transition, not even close to all. Only about 20%, less than 20% are getting surgery, bottom surgery. And even fewer trans men getting bottom surgery. They're more getting on top surgery. The phalloplasty has not advanced nearly as much as the vaginoplasty has, and it's nowhere near as available and not as like aesthetically satisfactory as the vaginoplasty is. But there are people, I wouldn't want to guess any proportions, but there are many people that don't use any hormones at all and live full time in transgender role. Others like myself, I'm fine. I'm okay with the hormones for now. You know, I made a deal with God. You know, the higher medicine's going to fix me. You know, let's live with it, and we'll take care of you when you know, in the next life or when we get back and fix the world. It's pretty much the deal I made when I was a little kid. It's the only reason my parents, my father and I survived this long. So, God was on my side. I would have killed myself and my father when I was about 15. But a lot of people don't want it. No, I don't want to even make any guesses about the proportions, but people don't want the surgery. A lot of people don't want the surgery. Some people can't get the surgery because of health issues. And there are a lot of people that want the surgery but can't afford it. The first step is typically counseling. Well, let's check and see if anybody said anything lately. Yes, I like root beer floats. We used to call them Black Cow. This was vanilla ice cream. And my favorite kind of ice cream is like chocolate with lots of other chocolate in it. Okay. A 2010 study, the first step is typically counseling. A 2010 study by Jamie Grant and colleagues on behalf of the National Center for Transgender Equality and the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, which at the time was the most extensive survey of transgender discrimination ever undertaken, found that 75% of respondents received counseling related to their gender identity, and an additional 14% hope to receive it someday. Only 11% of the overall sample did not want it. Even among those who had medically transitioned, 89% had received counseling. Among those who had some type of surgery, 91% had received counseling. This counseling may involve a gender-related mental health diagnosis, such as gender identity disorder, now termed gender dysphoria. Recent studies have shown that need for psychiatric help decreases significantly. People after surgery over time, that they just stop needing shrink as much. Typical next step is hormone therapy. Grant and colleagues found that 62% of respondents have had hormone therapy, and likelihood increasing with age, an additional 23% hope to have it in the future. An additional, often last step is surgery. This step may involve a range of procedures. For instance, in a male transition to female, typical surgeries include chest surgery, orchiectomy, or removal of testes, and vaginoplasty. Of the transgender women in the study, 18% had had chest surgery, 54% want it, 28% do not. 21% have had surgery to remove their testes, 59% want that surgery someday, 20% do not. 20% have had vaginoplasty, 60% want it someday, 20% do not. For a female transitioning to male, typical surgeries include chest surgery, hysterectomy, metalloidoplasty, a procedure that involves releasing the clitoris and creating testes. No, never mind, I won't go there. And phalloplasty. Of transgender men in the study, 41% have had chest surgery, 51% want it someday, 8% do not want it. 20% have had a hysterectomy, 57% want one someday, and 23% do not. 3% have had a metalloidoplasty, 51% want it, and 45% do not. 2% have had phalloplasty, 26% want it someday, and 72% do not want it. I wouldn't want anything done to my chest. I see way too many men and women both with their nipples all wrong after they've had chest surgery. The nipples are just like all cattywampus. Like, no, I like my girls the way they are. Right? They're just fine. Thank you. In studies like the one by Flores and colleagues, a person anywhere in the process of transitioning might say yes when they ask if they're trans. Interviewers do not tell respondents how far along they must be in order to answer in the affirmative. Still, excuse me. Still, the increasing incidence rates cannot be chalked up to definitions and self-reported data alone. Within study comparisons, consistently show that transgender prevalence is indeed increasing over time. Increases over time may be attributable to better awareness by doctors and the public. It's more like safer. Recent survey of pediatricians indicated only 47.1% felt confident in providing care to transgender youth. The researchers recommended enhanced training for pediatricians in transgender-specific care. What it really comes down to, though, is for kids, it's just to let them make their own decisions about their hair and their clothing and their playthings and their playmates. That's really all it comes down to. And then they end up using less drugs because they have less need for the psych drugs. The researchers recommended enhanced training for naturally, as doctors become more familiar with transgender populations, diagnoses may become more prevalent. The rise in self-identification may follow better care. I don't think the numbers are really increasing so much as that people are coming out about it more. It's just the same numbers are there. I mean, you can see it. The ideal man and the ideal woman are like only a small fraction of the population. The really manly man and the womanly one. It's just a few percent. It's just a few percent. It's stupid to be holding people's especially transgender people. It's like there's just not how many people like qualify for runway modeling. No, I'm sorry. I just I don't see that. There's just no um, colors and clothing and, haircut, hair length, or any of that stuff has anything to do with a person's biological gender. It's just the way they dress themselves. Complicating this profile, some children transiently identify with another gender only to later have those feelings subside, feeding into charges that being transgender is a mere fad. What's that one? Oh, that's more Mayer and McHugh's bullshit. Oh, and the Steensma. The same shit keeps popping up. The Steensma study is one from the Netherlands that was done quite some time ago, a lot of years ago, I forget. And it did not distinguish between children who actually had gender dysphoria and kids who were just gender variant at all. So there was a very high desistance rate that they always embrace. According to DSM-5, among natal females, meaning persons whose genitalia at birth presented as female and who experience cross-gender identification, 12 to 50% persisted in bad identification in natal male. Yeah, see, this is bullshit. That it's old, bad. It's a bad. It's an old study with a bad sample. In natal males, persistences range from 2.2 to 30%. Thus, for natal females who identify during childhood as male, the rates of non-persistence, or MELT, may be as low as 50% and as high as 88%. For natal males, non-persistent, range between 70 and 98%, 97.8%. However, a 20-year longitudinal study of trans children, which began in 2013, has indicated that transgender identities in even very young children are surprisingly solid and consistent across measures, contradicting popular beliefs that such feelings are fleeting or that children are simply pretending to be the opposite gender. That's from Christina Olson. I should probably read that sometime too. When sex and gender collide, the study of transgender kids are revealing fascinating insights about gender in the brain. That's from 2017. This is saying results so far show that trans children have just as firm a sense of their own gender as non-trans kids at very early ages, both when asked directly and when tested. Furthermore, trans kids follow different trajectories than children who simply prefer toys and clothes associated with the opposite gender. Importantly, whether these indicators of mental health stay strong as our cohort of trans children moves into the teen years remains to be seen, and certainly our all-volunteer sample is unlikely to be fully representative of all trans children alive today. This is true. Now, the criticism of her sample is that it's largely children of privilege, that there's nobody from the inner city in her sample. And the kids of privilege, trans kids of privilege, races just doing astounding things. Tearing up the Kim Petras. Kim Petras, I didn't see where she played. She played, I think, I forget. I think she was playing Oklahoma City or something, Tulsa or something, I forget. And she came out to twerk at the Westboro Baptist people that were demonstrating across the street. Like Hunter Schafer with her show. Hunter Schafer, here's Hunter, and her father's like a minister, some Presbyterian minister. They fought against I think it was South Carolina bathroom bill. And then after she graduated high school, she's like modeling, doing runway modeling for all the major houses, every last one of them. all the big houses. And then somebody approached her about doing this TV program, and she insisted on working with the producer to develop the character so the character was real and believable. Who else? God, it's just they're all over the place. They're all over the place, and just doing. I mean, even just sleepers like me. I mean, it's just such a big change in my life. Just shaving off the beard and stop pretending to be a guy. That's all I'm doing. That's all I did. That's all I really did. Well, I've been taking hormones now for a few years, and that's helped a lot. But that's all I really did. I just stopped pretending, and it's just such a huge change in my life. My focus, my ability to create things, my writing, my music, my stonework. It's all just I feel good about me, and people feel good about me. People make me feel good, and no matter how hard these like idiots like gaslight me, it's like it must hurt to be like so hateful. I mean, it just really must hurt to be so mean and stupid and hate so hard. Anybody else saying anything? Oh, thanks, Donald. Let me continue, because like I said, this is kind of long, but we're getting there. We're getting through it, because about half the page is notes. So yeah, see that this is all old data. That's all. Well, no, that's different data. The important thing for that the healthcare providers that I've talked to like to stress is that it's all on a case by case basis. You can there's no rule book. That they have and a lot of them are just like playing by ear. Most of them are playing by ear. There are pretty well established standards of care, but everybody's different. Everybody has a different presentation. Everybody's like little neuroses are going to be different. It's all different. In the face of this mixed picture, many parents struggle to decide how best to support their children. This struggle is perhaps most apparent with parents of children with disorders of sex, with differences of sex development, children that older authorities refer to as intersex. A study by David Sandberg and colleagues indicated that parents have reported levels of post-traumatic stress syndrome comparable to those reported by caregivers of children diagnosed with cancer. Some of the parents of these children fell into the mild, moderate, or severe ranges for anxiety and for depression. Like these parents, transgender individuals often experience serious mental distress, culminating in dramatically increased suicide rates. Ultimately, these public health concerns are what should guide our discussion in public policy, rather than get bogged down in the science or disputing the fact of increased number of people identifying as transgender. Part 3 chronicles, I don't know, I don't even want to read that Mayor McHugh shit. Fuck them. I'm not even going to read that shit. It's thoroughly been debunked, rejected. Let's just skip that. To the limits of science. Whether a biological basis underpins cross-gender identification is not nearly as important as how society responds to the difficulties faced by trans persons. Yes, I mean, this is a distraction. And it just makes our life more difficult to have to be debating it. Still, the outlines of our nascent scientific understanding may be illuminating about how little can be said definitively in any direction. I don't know if that's so true. Of course, things have changed. This paper seems to have been written in about 2017. And so shit's happened. And that the Lytton paper, for instance, is causing a lot more problems on the debate than the McHugh and Mayer paper. The McHugh and Mayer paper has been laid to rest, and the Littman stuff is just all over the place still, even though it's been completely trashed by her peers. While the science regarding trust, see, it's McHugh. See, this is where the problem is. It's McHugh who claims that supporting a child's decision to transition is child abuse. It's like performing liposuction on an anorexic child. That's the source of that shit. It's fucking McHugh. Still, the outlines of our nascent scientific understanding may be illuminating about how, oh yeah, I said that. While the science regarding cross-gender identification is embryonic, two explanatory theories have gained traction in the scientific community. One, anatomical differences in the brain, and two, pre- and postnatal hormone exposure. Some believe cross-gender identification rests on a combination of the two. This part briefly canvasses some of the findings of this burgeoning literature. Although few people likely have given much thought to the idea, there are sexually dimorphic parts of the brain, meaning across large groups of males and females, some parts of the brain exhibit structural differences. And well, I should go and get that out for the kids in the group. But I should get. I got a lot of work to do in the Transgender science group, thanks to this one. I mean, this is just loaded with all kinds of really interesting scientific papers. So differences occur in absolute brain volume, amount of white matter, amount of gray matter, cortical thickness, and the hypothalamus, among others. Researchers have examined the brains of trans individuals. The question driving researchers is whether these anatomical structures in subjects' brains more closely resemble the brains of persons matching their gender identity or the sex assigned at birth. Neuroanatomy studies have shown mixed results. Well, I guess it's unfortunately the studies on structural characteristics of transsexual subjects' brains also yielded conflicting results, which are in many cases difficult to interpret and compared to the potential confounds of hormone replacement therapy and sexual orientation. The differences vary by gender identity. For instance, one study of white matter fiber tracts compared the brains of trans individuals with their natal counterparts. White matter fibers are believed to conduct, process, and send nerve signals up and down the spinal cord. In male to female individuals, the structures differed from both natal males and natal females. The male to female individuals fell between both groups. By contrast, female to male individuals were more similar to natal males. And my brain's never been done, but my brain chemistry was. And it was low normal for a female and kind of off the chart on estrogen for male. Or not estrogen, one of the hormones. The female hormones. It was, it's a little more. I was low normal on the female hormones for and off the chart on the LH and FSH, stuff like that, and off the chart for them for male. One study found that the gray matter of male to female individuals was consistent with their birth sex, except as to the putamen, which more closely resembled natal females. The putamen was thought to regulate movement and learning. How about that? And I've talked about that. It's more than just clothing. I had trained myself how to move so that I could pass as a male without being, called sissy boy. Other studies have found no sex atypical features with signs of feminization of the putamen. But researchers noted significant volume reductions of the thalamus in the putamen in male and female individuals. The thalamus is believed to be central to relaying information to the brain from peripheral parts of the body. One study of neuron volume of the central division of the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis of the hypothalamus, which is believed to be essential for sexual behavior. 195, oh no, that's a note. That's a number. Examined the brains of 7 individuals post-mortem. The study found that BSTC neuron volume matched that of the trans individuals opposite birth assigned sex. That's an awfully small sample. I'm sorry. Still, other studies have found no differences until adulthood, calling into question whether observed differences were due to hormone treatment or other outside causes. A handful of findings. A handful of findings make it difficult to draw many conclusions other than brain science is still developing. As Smith and colleagues observed in 2015, in transsexualism, 2 structures seem to have developed in a sex-atypical way, with size and neuron structure number closer to the desired rather than the natal sex. While observed differences occurred in male and female transsexuals, which more closely resembled that of controlled females, and sex reversal also seems to occur in female to male transsexuals, up to now, data is only available for 2 individuals. These researchers note that due to difficulties arising from conflicting results and study limitations, it's not possible to define a neuroanatomical marker for transsexualism. Now, with hormones, during pregnancy, the fetus is exposed to various hormones, principally androgens, i.e. testosterone and estrogens. When androgens are present, the brain develops in the male direction, and when they are absent, in the female direction. In a typical pregnancy, a male fetus is exposed to androgens during week 8 through 24 of gestation, again postnatally. Well, there's figures here. The fetal brain becomes sexually differentiated at one time, while the sex organs differentiate at another. The sex organs differentiate between week 6 and 12 of pregnancy, shown as T1. Sexual differentiation of the brain begins in the second half of pregnancy. In the 6th week of pregnancy, the ovaries and testicles develop. In a male fetus, the testes producing testosterone, influencing the sexual differentiation of the sex organs. The body converts testosterone into dihydrotestosterone, which helps to form the penis, prostate, and scrotum. In females, the sex organs differentiate on the absence of androgens. The brain develops under the influence of sex hormones such as testosterone, estrogens, and progesterone. Testosterone levels may even act on developing neurons during pregnancy. Male and female children have different distributions of steroid receptors in the brain. Notably, male and female children are exposed to significantly different levels of hormones during pregnancy. Males have elevated levels of testosterone in 2 stages, week 12 through 18, and again in the first 3 months after birth. In females, there is a surge of estrogen during the first 3 months after birth. For some instances, a female is exposed to elevated levels of androgens due to external forces. This can occur because of conditions affecting the mother or conditions affecting the child. And they're turning the frogs gay with the, they laughed at Alex Jones, but they have found a number of chemicals, most notably DES. Oh, they're going to talk about DES here. Here we go. Consider mothers first. During pregnancy, women may be prescribed hormones or drugs that affect their hormones. In the past, doctors prescribed expecting mothers diethylstilbestrol, a synthetic estrogen then thought to decrease the likelihood of miscarriage. At the time, healthcare providers believed miscarriages were caused by low levels of estrogen. DES is no longer prescribed to expecting mothers. The drug has been associated with certain vaginal and breast cancers in women, as well as lasting effects on children exposed to DES in utero. The children are more likely to have problems in their reproductive system. Studies have linked DES to genital malformation and some intersex conditions in children. Certain genetic conditions affecting fetuses can introduce atypical levels of hormones too. In these circumstances, the fetus just receives a different amount of androgens than the fetus otherwise would have. For instance, some forms of congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH, a group of conditions in which a person lacks an enzyme needed by the adrenal glands, can spike fetal androgens levels. CAH can affect one or more of three steroid hormones, cortisol, mineralocorticoids, and androgens. Some forms of CAH result in insufficient production of cortisol, which can lead to an overproduction of androgens. Some studies suggest an increase in rates of being trans among natal females with CAH. Some theorize that abnormal levels of hormones during development may lead to a child cross-gender identifying. What is that? Doesn't say. Mothers prescribed androgenic progestins, which increase testosterone exposure to the fetus, have children with increased male typical play, while mothers prescribing anti-androgenic hormones had children with reduced male typical play. Additionally, epileptic women sometimes take phenobarbital or diphantoin. These drugs change the metabolism of the sex hormones and can act on the sexual differentiation of the child's brain. Studies will also focus on the ratio of the length of the second and fourth fingers as an indicator for prenatal testosterone exposure. Generally, this is a 2 to 4 ratio, 2D to 4D. That is the length of the second to fourth fingers in females is greater than it is in males. Studies of male to female have found a ratio comparable to second and fourth finger. My fourth finger is longer. And here, this is the point of the guy's whole thing here. While existing science cannot definitively unpack all of these possible influences, science often is unable to pinpoint the exact cause of many phenomena. Where our scientific understanding ends, compassion should pick up. Whatever the cause for cross-gender identification, many people who experience this are struggling. Trans persons report elevated levels of stress, sometimes psychological distress. A national study conducted in 2013 found that of the 1,093 transgender persons who participated, 44.1% had clinical depression, 33.2% had anxiety. 42% of transgender youth have a history of self-injury. LGBT youth face significant bullying, with the worst rates for trans youth. Most concerning, the suicide attempt rates for trans individuals have been reported to be as high as 41%, significantly outstripping the general population, which historically has hovered around 5%. Other study placed the rate of attempted suicide among trans youth at roughly 1 in 3 teens. Even at the lower end of the estimates, the fact of the matter is that we're dealing with a public health crisis. In fact, the clinical studies are showing that all of it has nothing to do with being transgender, except for the way we're treated for being transgender. Every last bit of it is about the way we're treated for being transgender. That when we live in a supportive environment, the suicide rate falls right back down under 10%, like every other generation, most other demographics. Historically, access to health care for trans individuals, including mental health services, has been frustrated by a lack of insurance coverage. Nearly half of physicians report a lack of reimbursement for transgender-related medical visits and treatment. Importantly, the ACA extended bans on discrimination on the basis of sex, among other characteristics, to federally funded or administered health programs or activities, as well as to health insurance marketplaces and plans sold through them. During the Obama administration, the Department of Health and Human Services promulgated regulations under the ACA that explicitly extended the ban on sex discrimination to encompass sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination too. In December 2016, yeah, see, this is already old news, all of this. The U.S. District for the Northern District Court of Texas enjoined those regulations nationally. Suits over denial of gender reassignment and other procedures to trans persons continue to be pressed in the courts under the ACA itself, rather than now enjoined regulations. As noted above, new policies in the Trump administration may frustrate access to services. Oh boy. they totally erased this from the CDC site the other day. Importantly, federal courts are split on whether sex discrimination bans in hiring and education bar gender identity discrimination too. Notably, one day after Attorney General Jeff Sessions was sworn in, Department of Justice filed a motion in a case pending in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. This filing withdrew an Obama-era motion to limit a temporary injunction to block guidance, which gave transgender students access to the bathroom of their choice. So the withdrawal left the injunction unchallenged and operative. Together, these developments place a cloud over access to services by the trans community, although whether they block access to needed care remains to be seen. A lack of visibility may contribute to negative experiences of transgender individuals. A 2015 study commissioned by GLAAD found that only 16% of Americans report knowing or having worked with someone who is transgender. When this number increased from 8 to 16 in the space of 7 years, few Americans knew a transgender person or are aware of what they do. Physicians and healthcare providers are no exception. A survey administered to members of the Society for Adolescent Health and Medicine and the Pediatric Endocrine Society found that only 47.1% of doctors, responding doctors, felt confident in their ability to provide care for transgender youth. Access to health care for trans individuals has been complicated by doctors' lack of clinical training and care for this community. Boy, that's a big focus for a lot of people in a lot of places, is getting out there and teaching the institutions how to just relate to trans people respectfully and effectively, so that we're comfortable with their service and that they are providing us with what the law requires that they provide us with. That's a big job. A lot of advocates out there constantly giving seminars at institutions to groups about just transgender sensitivity, because nobody knows us. No, it's been a big problem. And you know, if I end up jabbering about this afterward, the big problem is that the most visible are the worst examples of the community. That before 2015, hardly anybody besides sex workers, porn stars, and drag queens were visible. And now we've got all these fucking whack jobs out there that are making themselves visible and like throwing tantrums in strange places and starting fights and stuff. And that's just not where it's at. Our advocates have always, I mean, yeah, the girls started with, you know, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson started throwing bricks and shot glasses and shit. But that, you know, that are the actual advances have been made in the courtrooms and legislatures and in the public arena. And that's all been, you know, classy and good humor. You know, good humor and coherent delivery of the facts is what's gotten us to where we are today. Now these fucking screaming idiots going toe to toe with all the TERFs and Nazis. That's nuts. It's stupid. It's just giving them publicity. and given all sorts of ammunition to the opposition to say, hey, see, look, these people are just fucked up. How much of the stress experienced by a trans person is tied up with stigma itself is hard to tease out. In a study of 191 transgender women, depression and anxiety were associated with transgender stigmatization. The researchers used the 9-item everyday discrimination scale to identify stigmatization. Depression was measured using the 20-item system for epidemiological studies depression scale. Anxiety was measured using the anxiety subscale of the brief symptoms inventory. That's why we call them rat runners. This study asked respondents questions like, how often do people act as if they are better than you because you are a transgender woman? Never. At least not real people. I don't count the trolls as real people. 49% said they've had such an experience. And well, actually, it wasn't never. There were 2 women that ran that shit at me. 3 women have run that shit at me in 6 years. Among the participants surveyed in a 2013 Massachusetts study, 65% reported difficulties in accessing public accommodations during the preceding 12 months. Respondents reported access barriers in transportation, retail establishments, restaurants, public gatherings, and healthcare. Researchers found that the risk for adverse emotional and physical symptoms increased from 31% to 81% among persons who reported an access barrier. Many delayed seeking health care when sick or injured or in need of preventive or routine health care. Massachusetts broadened its 1989 sexual orientation and non-discrimination law to encompass gender identity in July 2016, and that endured a challenge in 2018 as question 3 passed on a huge margin. It's like 3-1. A classic public approach asks not just what factors increase the risk of a negative outcome, it asks what factors may be protective. The one protective measure identified thus far is when parents support their child's gender identity. Boy, that is just number one. That just is making such a huge difference in these people's lives, everybody's lives, because the parents suffer along with the kid. When they force the kid into the wrong gender role, the kid acts out and makes the parents' life difficult. Mayor and McHugh evade the difficult choices facing family and diet. It's not a difficult choice. It is iniquitous, they say, to believe that all children who have gender atypical thoughts or behavior at some point in their development, particularly before puberty, should be encouraged to become transgender. No, this is just like wrong-headed. One does not become transgender. One is or is not transgender. One does or does not act out on their being transgender and express as somebody of the opposite gender. But you don't become transgender. You're born with the potential to be this way or you're not. And all that they're doing, all what they've decided on, the best practices, and they've had incredible success with it, is just to let the kids make their own choices about how long to wear their hair, about what clothes to wear, and about what things they want to play with. Now, I didn't have a whole lot of trouble with the playthings. I never really wanted dolls anyway. I'm into dolls. Live animals. I was into live animals. No, I didn't like stuffed animals. I had live animals. We had hamsters, dogs, fish. Yeah, children can have better outcomes if no, they are having better outcomes when their parents support them. 2016 study published in Pediatrics detailed this gender affirming approach. I'm probably gonna have to dig that puppy out too. Mental health difficulties in transgender adults and adolescents, the researchers believe, are linked to years of prejudice, discrimination, and stigma. Conflict between one's appearance and stated identity, and general rejection by people in their social environments, including their families. That says it all right there. And it's not because we're transgender, it's because people hate us. They cite growing evidence that social support is linked to better mental health outcomes among transgender adolescents and adults. Previous research had focused primarily on adults and adolescents. So this team examined the value for children of social transitioning, which they defined as the decision by a family to allow a child to begin to present in all aspects of the child's life with a gender presentation that aligns with the child's own sense of gender identity, and that it is the opposite of the gender assumed at the child's birth. Social transitions involve changes in the child's appearance, for example, hair and clothing, the pronoun used to refer to the child, and typically also a change in the child's name. The researchers utilized a national community sample with rigid inclusion criteria. And two control groups, one comprised of siblings of transgender children in the study, and the other made up of children with no history of cross-gender behavior. The researchers focused on internalizing symptoms rather than externalizing symptoms. Internalizing symptoms refer to things such as anxiety and depression. Social transition, prepubescent transgender children showed typical rates of depression and only slightly elevated rates of anxiety symptoms compared with population averages. Well, hey, you know, the anxiety level, just because they're getting supported in the house, boy, some of the shit that these kids go through and their parents with them. When transgender children were supported in their identities, they had internalized symptoms that were well below even the preclinical range. Compared to previous studies of children with gender dysphoria, socially transgender children had substantially lower rates of internalizing symptoms. While this data cannot definitively say that socially transitioning will help every child whose gender identity is inconsistent with their natal sex, it certainly suggests that socially transitioning operated to be protective of these children. Importantly, social transitioning does not prevent the supported child from resuming a natal gender identity at a later time, but supports the child now. And that's it. It's like, you know, that's what the parents here would say. You know, it's like, so what? You know, we're concerned with our parents, our children's contentment and happiness right in the moment. And if somewhere down the road they decide, well, they don't want to be this way anymore, well, that's good too, and they're going to support them in that. And the community should be the same way. That, you know, if somebody decides that they don't want to follow through and want to go back to what they were doing before, this does not make them a traitor to the community. That's just a bunch of nasty bullshit. So their conclusion: despite the fact that we do not yet know what influences impact the identification with another gender, society faces a choice. It can beg off, claiming that because we do not completely understand the phenomena, nothing can be done, or it can act compassionately toward trans persons, many of whom are struggling. Compassion should be the guiding consideration. It'd be nice if they just bugger off already. So, hardly anybody lasted. Who's still here? Who's still here? Anybody other than the bot? Because, like, really, if nobody's going to say nothing, that was almost 2 hours of that stuff, and I'm done. Thanks for watching, those of you who actually did. Rock and roll. Happy day. Bye.